Brownlee, licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist. Today we're going to talk about sibling relationships, and specifically ones that are impacted by highly abusive or narcissistic families. These families are highly dysfunctional, and frequently adult siblings cannot maintain positive relationships with one another. And there's quite a few reasons why that is. So that is what this video will cover today. I hope you find it helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below, and feel free to hit that subscribe button, since my channel is all about helping people just like you who come from very dysfunctional and abusive families of origin. All right, let's get started, everyone. Okay, the first one I want to talk about is parents do not provide unconditional love. And when this happens, children are really set up to feel like they're competing with their siblings. Siblings do not realize when they're very young that the parents are not capable of this, and that it's a parental problem. It's not the child's fault, for example, that the parent is not able to provide unconditional love. So what happens is a lot of siblings feel anger and resentment and potentially even hatred of another sibling. They might feel another sibling is favorited and they aren't getting enough attention and support from the parent. And so this infighting that develops really can carry into adulthood and make it hard for adult siblings to be close to one another, especially if they think mom or dad has a favorite. So yeah, unconditional love is very important. When it's present, it's easy for siblings to get along because no one's competing for mom and dad's love. It's just very present, and nobody has to question if they're loved either. So yeah, if your family lacked a lot of unconditional love, that is probably a reason you're not able to be very close to your siblings as an adult. Okay, the second is that parents play favorites. So I've listed out a few roles that children can take on. Golden child sounds just like what you think. It's the parent's favorite child. Oftentimes the golden child is the child that the parent most identifies with. Maybe this child has a lot of the same temperament or traits, or is very successful in some way, shape, or form similar to the parent. Maybe the child reminds the parent of themselves in some way, shape, or form that the parent identifies with and is proud of. But either way, the golden child is frequently the child that can do no wrong. So maybe the other siblings get punished, for example, for the exact same behaviors that the golden child gets away with. So that's something I see frequently. The scapegoat is the child that is like the identified patient in the family system. This is the child that the whole family has identified as, you're the reason why this whole family is unhappy. It's all your fault. So the scapegoat is a convenient fall guy for the dysfunction in the family. The family is never going to admit that they're dysfunctional. So the scapegoat serves a very useful purpose for the adults and the dysfunctional members to essentially carry on the big lie that the whole family is healthy and perfectly normal. Because after all, it's little Timmy over there that's the actual problem. Oh, he is just constantly acting out and constantly talking back, or little Maria, she's too sensitive, constantly whining and crying. Oh, she's annoying. So you'll see a scapegoated child essentially is the one the family picks on and pretty much blames everything on. It doesn't mean that the child is to blame whatsoever for the family's dysfunction. It's just essentially one person that the family identifies as to blame for the dysfunction in the family. Very common role. And then the third one that I listed here is the lost child. So the lost child is essentially a child that is very removed from the family, maybe emotionally. Maybe they spend a lot of time in their room, for example. You rarely see them at family functions. Maybe they're off doing their own thing, or maybe they've moved several states away. But the lost child is the one that kind of avoids interacting with a lot of the family, typically because, again, the family is dysfunctional, and that's the lost child's way of kind of surviving, is by staying far away. Now, these are by no means the only roles, but essentially you can see how the favorites start to create this narrative of siblings, again, being pitted against one another and a lack of genuine closeness in relationships. thing that can really impact adult relationships is how the siblings were treated when they were children. So, for example, if bad behavior from one sibling was never really corrected, maybe you had a sibling that was a big bully, that was constantly picking on the other siblings, and mom and dad just ignored it, or they just really looked the other way, or they were like, you guys figure it out yourselves. Essentially, that can lead to siblings never really learning things like how to resolve conflict and how to communicate and how to apologize and make up when hurt has happened. And parents certainly are not modeling these behaviors either. So essentially, you now have people grow up, they're now adults, and they really have no way of relating to one another in a healthy, genuine way without hurt. And sometimes adult siblings will continue the same exact bad behaviors they did when they were a child and continue to bully you even when you're an adult. So that I see happen fairly frequently as well. Okay, this is similar to what I touched upon before, that children take on roles in the family instead of being their authentic selves. So, in a family where there's a lot of abuse and neglect, you don't have safety whatsoever. So, in the absence of safety, what children end up doing is taking on roles that the family essentially says, okay, if you behave in this specific way, you're acceptable. So, for example, in my family, I was the good girl when I was a child. I was sweet, I was kind, very quiet, very, well behaved, rarely ever in trouble. And that was kind of my role, was this quiet, good girl who was just kind of ignored and put off to the side. And as long as I made no fuss and had no demands and had no feelings or thoughts or anything that I was trying to express of my own individual person, then I was acceptable. But as soon as I stepped out of my role and maybe started to speak up, maybe I tried to talk about actual feelings that were hurt, I essentially tried to communicate about things that were not okay, then boom, I was essentially ostracized and eventually went completely no contact from my family because I was not allowed to be my authentic self. And I was not allowed to have my own thoughts and feelings and to be able to express those. So that was my role. Quiet, good, don't make a fuss, don't make waves, you're fine. Otherwise, anything outside of that role, get out of here. You're no longer in the family. So that's how these roles work. It's not like you are your authentic self, for example. You are very much in this very defined, rigid box, is what I like to describe it. And that within this box are these rigid set of rules that it's not like anybody has said them out loud necessarily, but you know what they are. And these defined behaviors that you are supposed to be, behaving and be good. And then outside of that box, not allowed. So children who grow up in highly dysfunctional families have no sense of authentic self. They're not allowed to have their own thoughts. They're not allowed to have their own feelings. They're not allowed to speak up if something is wrong and they don't like it. They essentially are just supposed to be exactly who abusive mom or dad says they should be in order to be acceptable, and not one bit more than that. All right, the next one is open communication is not valued. And then we're going to talk about triangulation as well. So open communication is really when there is enough safety that everybody is allowed to talk about what they're thinking and feeling and what their own personal opinions or ideas are. And no one is going to punish them for having this type of communication style. So in healthy families, everybody can be themselves and everybody can talk about what's going on inside of them, and there's safety to do that. But in unhealthy families, there is not. And in fact, there usually is some sort of pressure, either said or maybe not said, but this unseen but definitely felt pressure to not talk about reality. The reality meaning the abuse, of course, that we don't talk about hurt feelings. We don't talk about behaviors that are hurting other people. And we sure as heck don't expect apologies or anything like that. Oh, no, 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 no. So essentially, open communication is a no-go. You're not allowed to have it in dysfunctional families. And you can definitely imagine how that carries over into adulthoods with adult siblings not really being able to communicate openly either about very real things that have happened that need to be communicated about. Like, we're not just supposed to rug sweep and ignore terrible, painful things that have happened, and oftentimes repeatedly. Like, that they just don't go away because we don't talk about them. But in our dysfunctional families, apparently everyone is operating under the assumption that, hey, don't say anything. It just doesn't exist. We'll just pretend it never happened, and it could be egregious, horrible things that have happened, but nobody's going to talk about them. Oh, no, no, no. Ha! They don't exist if we don't speak about them. So it really is this crazy making type of behavior that really discourages any type of real, authentic, genuine communication. So yeah, you're not really going to know one another on a deep level either because no one's talking about their inner worlds. It's not safe to do so. And then triangulation is another very common behavior seen in abusive or unhealthy families. And that's where members don't ever really talk one-on-one directly with another member. Instead, important things are communicated through a third party. And oftentimes this is done during conflict, especially like one member doesn't actually want to talk to the other member who they have conflict with. So they'll triangle in a third party and get them to go do their bidding and go talk to that person. And then that person will now have to go back and talk to the original person. And it just becomes a huge mess. So yeah, nobody ever actually dialogues and communicates one-on-one. They frequently have this triangulation pattern where a third party who should not be in the dialogue at all is essentially brought in to try to communicate. So yeah, not a great way to communicate at all. Another thing that makes adult sibling relationships really difficult to maintain is if there was a lot of abuse in our family of origin. Abuse essentially is a lack of safety. And without safety, there is no real close, loving relationship, whether we're a child or an adult. And unfortunately, if a parent was abusive on a regular basis, siblings didn't get a chance to really grow up with a sense of safety or to be close to one another. In fact, most of their childhood was probably spent in survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn going on all the time. And that does not equate to learning how to communicate, learning how to share, learning how to be cooperative with one another, sharing your innermost feelings and thoughts, and building intimacy, that emotional intimacy. That's not going on when children are in a state of fight or flight and just trying to survive. So no surprise if there was a ton of abuse when you were a child, you're also not going to really, unfortunately, be able to be close to your siblings when you're an adult either. Sometimes it's a little bit too late to foster adult relationships if they weren't created in childhood. Doesn't mean that it's never impossible, but it makes it a lot more difficult. This one is huge. Lack of accountability. So parents model this through behaviors like gaslighting, blame shifting, scapegoating, and never apologizing for harm done to their children. And toxic siblings learn this through the parental modeling of terrible behaviors, and they then continue these same behaviors into adulthood, which of course makes it very hard to maintain an adult relationship with somebody who has never been accountable for incredibly painful things that they have done to you. Yeah, real healthy relationships do not operate like this. If there is some sort of painful thing that has occurred, people make mistakes, right? What happens is healthy people apologize right away. And then what happens is you don't get layers and layers of very painful hurt over time that has never been resolved. So unhealthy and dysfunctional families are never going to be accountable for the abuse. Oh, no, no, no. Again, it's always somebody else's fault. That's a key theme that goes on in abusive families everywhere, is that the perpetrator is never going to be accountable for the abuse. It is always somebody else's fault. Of course, that scapegoat, right? Definitely it's a scapegoat's fault. And so this lack of accountability, unfortunately, oftentimes what we see is some of the adult siblings in the family pick up this very unhealthy behavior. It's very narcissistic as well, to essentially blame shift and blame everyone else and never take accountability. It's a very narcissistic thing to do. So, yeah, you may have some adult siblings or sibling that does this, and it is impossible to have a healthy relationship with somebody who hurts you repeatedly and is never accountable for it. Yeah, that's not going to happen. All right, the last one, things are valued more than people. So, what do I mean by that? So, very abusive and narcissistic individuals cannot actually bond and attach to people, unfortunately. They're damaged on the inside, and their attachment system is definitely damaged on the inside. And so, what you see is this pattern of valuing material items and money more than human beings. It's incredibly sad, actually, because it goes against everything that our biology is programmed to do, which is to attach and bond with people. But yeah, in abusive families, you're not going to have people bonding with one another. And in lieu of that, typically possessions and money and wealth is valued more. That brings more happiness to abusive and dysfunctional people than genuine human connections. So that's essentially what you're seeing in your adult relationships, oftentimes with narcissistic or abusive siblings, is they don't value genuine human connection. They value objects, they value material wealth. Oftentimes you see siblings stealing inheritances from their other siblings when the parents die. That's common. But yeah, they don't value genuine human connections. So if you do, and you're trying to have a genuine human connection with them and it's downright impossible, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. What I had to learn firsthand is that not every person I came across and people in my family actually value human connection. I did, but they don't. They're wired very, very differently from us. And sometimes that's part of our grief process, is learning that people can be vastly different from us, and sometimes they're just not capable of meeting our needs for a close, loving relationship. And that's okay. Not everybody is meant to be in our life for a lifetime. And that's part of our grief process of letting go of siblings that ultimately are very dangerous and unhealthy for us. I hope you found my video helpful. Feel free to drop any comments or questions below. And again, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be trying to release videos weekly again about narcissistic abuse and internal family systems therapy, trauma therapy, and all sorts of other wonderful topics. I have a big library already available for you if you haven't seen my videos before. And yeah, it's been wonderful seeing you guys, and I look forward to seeing you all in my next video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.